Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give it just a minute for people to trickle in and then we'll get started. I've got 8:01 Mountain Time, so we'll slowly get the ball rolling. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining on this lovely Saturday. My name is Tav Kitron. I work as an elite tutor, teaching mostly SAT, ACT, and of course PSAT prep, as well as doing some executive function coaching. I've been with the company for over 10 years at this point in various capacities, but now I'm coming to you from Colorado near Boulder, where I just tutor via Zoom full time. And then we offer obviously these presentations to kind of give people some guidance. We're going to talk strategy. I'm going to leave it open for questions at the end. We're booked for 90 minutes today, so I'll probably talk for a little over an hour, and then we'll take time to do practice questions and so on. But I will also leave time at the end for questions. You should have seen a little poll launch. We'll do another one at the end, but then once you finish that, you can click that out. Closed captioning should be an option that's available. And these presentations do get recorded. I believe that Appleroot generally sends them out the Friday after. So if you registered for this presentation, you can expect to receive the recording of the webinar sometime in the coming week. But again, take notes as you see fit, put questions in the Q&A. I'll get to them at the end. And yeah, let's get the ball rolling. Let's talk PSAT today. Here's what we're planning to cover. Structure and import of the PSAT, which is all digital and computer based now. We'll look at the first two sections, which are both verbal, talk about the content and major strategies that you can keep in mind. Look at the math content, major strategies there as well. And then throughout, be thinking about like, how can I use these techniques? How can I use this information on a practice PSAT or the real PSAT, which many of you will be taking probably at school in a few weeks. So I've got a slide after this about just like what the PSAT is, but let's start with the scoring. So PSAT, which is the same as the SAT, like in almost every single way. So if you've done any preparation for the SAT, you already kind of know what the PSAT is and vice versa. The biggest difference is that the SAT is out of 1600. So a perfect score is a perfect 1600, 800 on verbal, 800 on math. For whatever reason, the PSAT is out of 1520. They say that the scoring scale like doesn't change, which I don't understand exactly how that works, but a perfect 760 and 760 will get you a perfect PSAT score of 1520. You add up the verbal and math for the total score. Again, SAT out of 1600, PSAT 1520. And then one of the unique things about the new SAT and PSAT, which changed a couple of years ago, is it's section adaptive. And this is a huge change. It's a big thing, and we need to have it just in mind, just to know what's coming. But the first module of both verbal and math is like a standard set form, right? It'll be slightly different from person to person. So like if you're taking the digital test, you're not seeing the exact same thing as the person next to you. But then based on how you perform on that first reading module or first math module, your second verbal and math modules will either be harder or easier. That's the adaptive part. So again, I'll say that again. If you do really well on verbal module 1, you'll get into section 2, it'll be the upper level verbal, which is what we want, because then your score floor and ceiling are much higher. Whereas let's say you miss 10 out of 27 questions on module 1, you might be then in the lower bracket. Everything's going to be way easier, but we don't want that. If modules 2 is super easy, that's not a good sign. That means we're in the lower bracket. And even if you're perfect on module 2, your score ceiling is much lower. You probably can't get above like a 600. Whereas if you get at the upper level modules, you probably can't get much below a 600, even if you miss like everything. So we'll talk more about that, but this is the general format and what you can expect: 2 verbal modules, short break, then 2 math modules. And so section adaptive is not the same as question adaptive, meaning if you do well on questions 1, 2, 3, that doesn't mean 4, 5, 6 will be harder. What it means is section adaptive means that if you do well on the whole of module 1, then all of module 2 will be the upper level. So section adaptive, not question adaptive. And that second and fourth modules, they'll adapt in only one of 2 ways, either going to be much harder upper level or quite a bit easier lower level. Because of this, earlier questions, meaning the first section and the third section, so first verbal and first math sections, actually count more than later ones. So let's say you miss 2 verbal questions on section 1 and then none on upper level. Really good. But it'd be better to miss none on module 1 and 2 on module 2. Your score would be a little bit higher. So simply put, the first sections, the before it's adaptive, those are worth a little bit more because those earlier questions are deciding whether you go into the lower or higher bracket. And then like you can't really control this, but let's say you get to module 2 and it's like, man, this is all very, very easy. We might have made it to the lower level, right? So you can't sweat that on test day. And if you're generally making it to the upper level, I'm sure you did. So don't like stress about it, but just know that that's a thing, right? We want that second and fourth modules to be quite a bit harder. Here's the timing and amount of questions. This is identical to the SAT. Modules 1 and 2 are 32 minutes, 27 questions. Modules 3 and 4 are 35 minutes, 22 questions for math. That's a total of much less time and many fewer questions than it used to be on the old PSAT. So much more time per question and just fewer things. So it's a shorter test. And another thing we can't really do much about, but just knowing it is, I think, good. Each of the 4 sections has 2 questions that simply won't count. They're experimental questions to gather data for future tests. We're not going to know which ones they are, but there will be 2 questions somewhere in each section that just aren't counted for the official score. And again, you get those 2 32-minute modules and then a 10-minute break, and the 2 math modules. Total testing time, including that break, is under 2.5 hours. That's way shorter than it used to be and way more time per question, which are both great changes. Like the test used to be quite long. So especially for my students with like ADHD or dyslexia or learning difference that gives them time and a half accommodations. That used to be a bit of a blessing and a curse because a 3-hour test then becomes 4.5, 5 hours. And if you have ADHD and lack of focus is not a strength, right? It's a weakness. That can be a compounding factor, right? So like being there for 5 hours really rough. Now a 2-ish hour test getting longer to like 3.5 hours with extended time is still manageable. So I just think it's been a nice change. There's no reason for these tests, these standardized tests, to be these breakneck speeds. People will still have timing issues at the end of modules 2 and 4, right? That happens to pretty much all my students, but it's much less of an issue than it used to be. And you can do, more picking and choosing of the questions that you want to attack versus skipping around and leaving the ones that you feel like are going to take longer, right? So this test is all about grabbing as many points as you can. And then like, what is the PSAT? I think a lot of people come in not knowing that. So let's talk about the significance, which for 99% of students, simply put, PSAT scores don't matter. So I don't want you to take that and think, okay, well, I'm out. I'm going to leave this presentation because it doesn't matter at all. What I mean by that is the PSAT scores are not things that are going to get sent to colleges. There are a few high schools that do use PSAT scores, like 10th grade PSAT scores, even for AP placement, right? Or for advanced, merit honors classes. But vast majority of schools and students, the PSAT doesn't really count for anything. what is it? It's really just a practice SAT. Now, the top 1-ish% of students in each state in the US are eligible for National Merit Scholarship recognition. And what that is really, it's a feather in the cap. So like I was a National Merit Scholar, right? A lot of people at my high school were. You get a $2,500 scholarship if you're a finalist. And it's a nice line on the resume. But like my SAT score is what really got me, like a 3/4 scholarship and like the real like scholarship money and offers from colleges and acceptances. The SAT score, which again, the PSAT helps you prepare for, going to be way more important. But if you're, an elite test taker, you're already at a high level and you know that national merit is something that you want to strive for, simply put, the verbal is more important on the PSAT. The National Merit Selection Index, which is a maximum of 228, is found by taking the first 2 digits of your verbal score, doubling that number, and then adding it to the first 2 digits of your math score. So let me write that out because that's pretty confusing. Let's say I just up here, like if I got a 740 on verbal, great score, and then a 710 on math. My national merit score would be 74 times 2, so 148, and then plus 71. This would be a great score of 219, good enough for national merit in a decent amount of states. So certain states like Washington State is very, very like competitive. And so hard to get national merit there versus like some of the southern states, Alabama, Mississippi, you can get a lower selection index and still get in the 1%. Compare this though to what if you got the same exact score, but it was 710 verbal, 740 math, right? Then you take that 71 times 2, right? And then add this. And interestingly, same exact PSAT score, but your selection index is lower. And this could definitely make a difference between national merit recognition and not. So again, verbal for the PSAT counts double. So if you are striving for national merit, that's the place to focus. Got to be pretty much perfect on verbal. And then I'll just say again, like this is very, very, very few people that get this. There's a tier right below where you can get like national merit recognition, which is also, again, a good resume filler. But I want you to, as we go through this presentation, really think of this more as almost like a PSAT and SAT prep webinar, because everything we talk about applies to the SAT. And for vast majority of students, the SAT or ACT, that's the score that's going to be more important for college admissions and scholarship money and so on. So it's not that the PSAT is totally insignificant, but as far as the scores themselves, they're not going to colleges, and it's not going to be like an end-all be-all. It's just an important timed test in an official kind of classroom testing environment that's essential practice for a lot of people. And again, I'll answer more questions about that later, but want to make sure we talk just a little bit about national merit, because that is why, when I'm tutoring PSAT, that is usually why. It's because we're a super high scoring, rising 11th grader that wants to get a really high score on their junior year PSAT, which is the one that counts. I've already seen a couple of questions come in, so just keep them coming and I'll get to those at the end. We'll have plenty of time for that. But let's talk about what we're here for. PSAT and SAT content and strategy, starting with the verbal section. But here's a few things that apply to every part of the SAT and PSAT. First is active reading, which used to be a different thing, right? All these tests were on paper, which the ACT still is, but the SAT and PSAT are all on computer. So active reading, it used to be have pencil in hand, make sure you're underlining, circling, starring, marking up the booklet, right? Because active reading is good. Passive reading is like, don't have my pencil, so I'm like this, and then maybe this, and then we're like that, and then we're in trouble. Still, online, the digital PSAT, there's a highlighter tool with some different colors. You can highlight words. Answer eliminator, you can see in that third box here. For verbal, that's probably my number one thing, and we'll look at what that appears as. But just always having the answer eliminator engaged and saying, okay, no, no, and then you've got 2 left, right? And then pick between them, move on. That's how a timed multiple choice test works. And then there are no guessing penalties, no points off for wrong answers. So if you don't know the answer or are running out of time, just pick an answer. I said C, but whatever answer you like, but pick that same thing all the way down. Because if you go B, 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 B on the 5 you didn't have time for, you're going to get probably 1 or 2 of those correct. If you Christmas tree it and go A, B, C, D, C, B, A, B, C, D, you're probably going to miss them all. So just probability wise, statistically, mathematically, it's okay to run out of time, not the end of the world, especially on module 2, for example. But then for those questions you don't get to, make sure they're the hardest ones. So skip around, grab the easy points, and then just guess the same letter for each if you don't have time to narrow down. All right, so let's talk reading and writing strategy. I mentioned 32 minutes, 27 questions, and we'll talk about like which question types and where they are laid out and the order and everything. Average per question is a little over a minute, but not all questions are created equal. So some will take more like 90 seconds or 2 minutes, others will take like 15 seconds. The old PSAT had 4 long reading passages on section 3, 10 questions each. Now they've combined the writing, so the grammar and the reading is combined, and each short passage has only 1 question associated with it. So we are kind of learning about more things, but spending less time in each spot and not having to really be an expert on, a 10 paragraph passage, which I think most students prefer so far. And you can see that on the left side. Sorry, it's a little bit scrunched, formatting weird, but these are both vocab questions, right? Which is generally how the verbal section will start. Here's what you're going to see when you open the Blue Book app. And so this is an important thing just to note for SAT and PSAT. This is now how we take the test. Whether you are on your own personal computer or a school device, the week before, like an SAT, for example, but PSAT as well, you have to go into the Blue Book app and you click a little yellow button that just shows that you're registered. What happens for the PSAT is generally it's a Wednesday, it's a school day for most, right? Some schools do it on different days, so check your school calendar. But you come in, everyone's there, you kind of all have your devices, right? Chromebook or whatever in your computer lab, and you're going to open up this app via your College Board account, your SAT account. What we see here is the time on top, which you can hide, and some students do, most don't, they just kind of let it tick down. Top right, we've got the annotate button. And again, that's about highlighting, underlining. Most important thing is going to be that answer eliminator, like I mentioned, which is right here. Sorry if my camera is covering that. And then if you have an issue with the question or it takes too long, or you just want to come back, you mark it for review. Down here, you can see all the questions, including ones you've marked or not answered yet. And then when you're done, of course, you hit next. If it's a practice test up here, there's options to save and exit it. But this is generally what you're going to see. So it's pretty straightforward. The platform's pretty good, I think. And the way the answer eliminator works is nice. You don't have to keep clicking it for every question. So for verbal especially, it's just about finding the things that are important, what's the question asking, and then elimination. And we'll talk specifically about each question type today. But yeah, this is how we take the test now. Again, it's all via the Blue Book app, which you download onto your computer. Very easy to do. And then you have to update it every so often, but that's usually pretty quick. So the structure that we'll break down and talk about again as well once we talk through each question type. I'm going to leave this slide up for a minute. First 4 questions, generally vocabulary. So that is something that if you're at a high level, vocab, flashcards, and learning words, just 10 per day, 50 per week or whatever, could be very helpful. Generally not the first step though for a student, especially if you're not like at a super high score already. The first step would be the grammar stuff. Questions 5 through 15 are the longer questions, not necessarily ones you need to do like in order. So sometimes if we're running out of time, you want to finish on those because they're harder. 16 through about 21 are grammar. That includes punctuation and clauses, the most common and the toughest stuff for a lot of people. Verbs, so verb tense, subject verb agreement, possession rules, and then misplaced modifiers. And that's pretty much it. They don't test that much other grammar other than that, which is nice. Then you've got a few questions that are connectors. So however, therefore, nevertheless, kind of also grammar-y. And the last couple are rhetorical synthesis, which are the bullet point questions, and we'll talk strategy there. But again, you do not have to go in this order. What I tell a lot of people is do like the first, 7 or 8, right? So the vocab and a few of the long ones, then skip to grammar and rhetoric. These are the ones that are usually the fastest, and ultimately we want them to be the easiest. And then we finish on 9 through 15, because if we run out of time and have to guess B, B, B for a few of those, oh well, not the end of the world. These are the longest questions and the hardest ones in the middle anyway. So particularly for module 2 upper level, I think this is a good strategy. Do a few at the beginning, but then make sure you jump here with plenty of time to spare. Here's a vocab and context question. Just giving people a look, and then if you want to just kind of try it and guess, you can do that. So the strategy for these is really read the left side of the question and honestly like mask the answers completely. So like on test day, the best thing you could do is ignore these, predict your own word or phrase, and then uncover these and eliminate the ones that don't match and pick the one that does. So like here, I might say, oh, frustrated. So frustrated with something negative of existing terms, frowny face, which means I don't want a nice, happy word like variety or precision. Those are both good words. So then we're down to these two. I plug them both in, frustrated with the limitations of existing terms, he coined a new term, or the obscurity. I know the word limitations and it works, so I'll pick it. If I saw limitations not working and I wasn't comfortable with what obscurity meant, I still might have to pick it just because I'd be down to that by elimination. But the process for these questions is as follows. We just saw it. Mask the choices, force yourself to not look because you'll bias like yourself into picking one of those words. Read the blurb and then predict your own word or phrase or even just a positive, negative vibe. That's all we can muster. Eliminate the choices that don't match, and then plug in remaining answers, trust your ear, analyze word roots, right? Like DIS means something bad, and PRO means something good or a lot. So you analyze the roots, the context, and then just pick an answer and move on. We don't have time to dwell on it. And if there's certain questions with really hard words, right, that might be one that a lot of people miss. So you do your best, but we won't get every single one of those. Then, like I mentioned, the 5 to 15 range, the long questions, the tough stuff, the stuff that people don't love, like 17th century poetry. So here, for example, our job is, which quotation from this poem most effectively illustrates the claim? So we'll read the question or the claim, I guess, a little passage to decide what the claim is. It says, in the poem, the speaker compares the changes in the season to the attitude of his beloved. So changes being compared to a person's attitude. And then we just eliminate. We go through answers and like, if this is definitely wrong, I'll cross it out. If I'm not sure, I'll keep it. So like an example of the way this one might go, I think it's a hard question, but I might keep A because I see her and winter. So like, I don't know, maybe. But B, and now no more the frost candies the grass or casts an icy cream upon the silver lake or crystal stream. It seems like all nature and season changes, nothing about a person. I can confidently cross out B, and I think C as well. Just talks about birds and the bees, and not in that way, but just like not people and not an attitude, just all nature. And then D is like A, where it's like, what the heck does that mean? So I'd be down to these two. I think because A says her, but is really personifying the earth and just saying, hey, winter's gone, the snow is melted, this is a better answer. Again, tough 17th century Old English, but it's basically saying the sun, even the sun doesn't have the power to melt her ice queen pity, right, and her cold heart. So comparing this nice weather to his beloved's kind of cold attitude. These questions are more demanding. For a lot of people, they are much harder than grammar and vocab. And some people are fine with them. They really like them. It's all about elimination, in my opinion, right? If you can get down, like think about the test writers, basement dwellers who write test questions all day, every day. So when we're working in a tutoring session, it's all about predicting what they're doing and thinking, all right, they write a question and a correct answer, and then 3 choices literally meant to fool us. So if we can find the bad words and the things that make these wrong answers wrong, that's how you confidently get to a good verbal answer. Not like math where you can prove it correct. The best you can ever feel when you're done with the verbal section is, shit, that was pretty hard. And I feel like I caught some of the tricks, but man, I barely had time and that was tough. That's a good sign. If you finish verbal thinking, piece of cake, aced it, usually it's not great. What we want is, gosh, that was a struggle, but that means you probably caught a lot of the tricks and were using your process correctly. Similar to command of evidence, just because it's in the middle part, is inference, which always looks like this. Which choice most logically completes the text? We're not going to do this one, but I just want to say like certain things to point out that are important, like connector words. However is a great one. And then even though this is quote unquote inference, you never want to make a big assumption or inference. The stuff will be in the text itself. So just knowing that these will come up, they're wordy, you can skip past them and do them at the end if you want. But it's really all about just what are the answers that are intentionally wrong, and we get to one we can't argue with. That strategy is as follows. Read the question, of course. What am I doing? Read the passage, predict an answer if you can, which is not always possible. Eliminate choices that you're like, I'm confident this does not work. If you're left with a couple, you have to keep moving. So you pick an answer that makes you say, well, it's true. I can't argue with that. Not I love it, not it's perfect, not I can prove it, but it is true. So it's often not very specific. We like vague, broad sparrow answers. So these sparrow is a small, unassuming bird. And then a peacock answer is usually bad, flashy, right? With really sweeping, specific words. We don't love peacock answers. We like sparrow answers that are vague, broad, general, and hard to argue with. This is included under command of evidence. So you will see graph questions like we have on the right. Sometimes 3 of the answers will just be wrong, like the data will just not be accurate. But more often, all the answers, or at least several, will be true in the graph, and we have to pick which one is relevant. So for these, it's read the question and the passage still, and then go to the answers. The temptation is go straight to the graph, but really you want to use the graph as you're evaluating each choice carefully. So just being aware that these questions will come up quite a bit. Some people really like them, and they're like, oh, this is almost like math or science in verbal, so we'll knock those out first. Others really don't, and so they'll save them for last. Matter of preference and experience. We're going to go to grammar in a second, but the last questions you will see on tests on verbal are always these bullet point ones. They can and should be the easiest questions. The job is simple. So you can see here, question and answers on the right, bullet points on the left. But really our job is read the question on the right, and we'll go back to this in a second. Test the answer choices and eliminate ones that just don't answer the question. So without looking at the bullets, you can still tell if certain question or choices answer the question itself. And if multiple remain, then you look at the bullet points, see which choice is actually true. But usually we won't need to. So like our job on this question. The student wants to do what? The student wants to introduce the research of Aubrey and Schmidt to an audience already familiar with global warming. So the first part is our answer must introduce the research of Aubrey and Schmidt, which A and D like don't mention their names at all and just clearly do not introduce their research. We can very, very confidently cross out A and D in this case. And then if we're already familiar with global warming, I'm not sure about B because it's saying it continues to be a major concern and they're planning a strategy to combat it. For one, it kind of makes it seem like we don't know what global warming is. And it also does their research later and doesn't introduce it very properly. So I hope it's choice C. Let's look at it. Says their names, says what they're doing, makes it seem like we already know what global warming is. This is a slam dunk. And I don't think it'll take that long. I think we can be pretty confident. And I never looked at these bullet points on the left because we didn't need to. That's why I like people to jump to these questions, though, on the early side. You do not want to be running out of time and have a minute left with 3 of these because you're going to miss some of them when you really shouldn't. If we get there with 15 minutes to spare, then we're always going to get these. And if you run out of time in the middle, oh well. Right, so prioritize the easier points, and these are among those easier points. And then I think something that is probably the most important part of verbal, like that I can help with just in the short term. And if you're preparing for PSAT or SAT, something that I would definitely do is look into grammar rules. Next page has the strategy for like all grammar questions, but or maybe 2 slides from now. But here, if you look at the answer choices, A and B are periods and semicolons, which on this test are identical with one exception. So like 9 out of 10 times, if you see like A and B, period, semicolon, nothing else has changed, they're both wrong because they're the same and we can't have 2 right answers. So that's an easy first step here is A and B out of there. Then I still haven't looked at the passage, but I'll see C versus D as comma or no comma. So now we can just read that part. Beatrix Potter is perhaps best known for writing and illustrating children's books such as The Tale of Peter Rabbit, but she also dedicated herself to mycology. And then here's C, the study of fungi producing more than 350 paintings of the fungal species she observed in nature and submitting her research on blah, blah. Kind of breathless. So let's see if the pause, if you make it super long with D, would work. She also dedicated herself to mycology, the study of fungi producing more than 350 paintings. That is a separate idea with an ing. We definitely need the comma. And so this question 21 here would be D as in dog. Notice that we don't want to test commas until the end because they do a lot of things and they're just hard to evaluate. So start with periods and semicolons. So let's have easy rules, which is full sentence before and after. Then test colons. The rule for a colon is it must come after an independent clause. It must introduce something. It's a drum roll. Dashes, usually if there's a dash, we need a second dash. You can take that stuff out. Then if there's answers with no punctuation like C, we could test that and see that it doesn't sound good. And that's how we would know it's choice D without really evaluating that. So just to make your life easier, always start with the periods and semicolons and colons because they have more definite rules, but do make sure you do some work to get familiar with those and really comfortable. And remember, these come at like the end along with connectors. For clauses, here's just a couple of little rules. So in case you are rusty or just don't know these, I'll leave that up for a minute. The first thing up here is commas, but again, commas separate ideas, and that's just a hard thing to trust your ear on and know, is this one idea or multiple? Versus an independent clause is just a full sentence. She prepared for the test, end thought. She studied hard, end thought. That's a perfect spot for a period or semicolon. And then the colon is, I had one great passion in life, drum roll please, what was it? Making pizzas. Eating pizzas for me, but to each their own. And looking out for this stuff, very, very crucial. Like I said, it will come up a lot. There's like 6 or 7 grammar questions per section. So on test day, you're going to get like anywhere from like 5 to 10 punctuation and clauses questions. So verbal, arguably the most important thing to cement. And then connector questions, I think honestly operate kind of similarly. You just have to look before and after to decide, is there contrast or are these ideas similar? And on the bottom there, I wrote a couple of words that are identical. So however is the same as nevertheless, but then also know that therefore, thus, hence, consequently, accordingly, those are all cause and effect words that are identical to each other. Here, this is not a hard one. It's saying organisms have evolved a number of surprising adaptations. Tadpole shrimp embryos, for example, can pause development for over 10 years. It's an example of a surprising adaptation to ensure survival. There is no contrast, so it's not A or C, and it's not a cause and effect relationship, so it's not D. The process for grammar and connectors, like I said, is go straight to the choices. So you know, oh, are they testing possession here or modifier, or is it just periods, semicolons, commas? Test those easier choices with more definite rules first. Whatever pops out is just simplest to you. As always, eliminate. That is the golden rule on verbal, is eliminate choices. And then trust your ear and pick the choice that fits, right? The one that is least bad, pick an answer and move on. So recap, 1 through 4, usually vocab. 5 through 15, the longer questions. And then 16 through 27 is grammar, connectors, and the bullet point questions, which is why you don't want to go in order, especially if timing is an issue for you. Which less so than it used to be, but most of my students do have struggles on time on module 2 upper level. It's just, there's a lot of hard questions, tough vocab, even the grammar is a little trickier. All the longer questions are just a little bit more involved. And so it's hard to get to everything with time to spare. So be strategic, skip questions here and there, and get the points you know you can get. Not your typical test where you have to be perfect on it. And then strategy recap for vocab, we said, predict your own word or phrase, something simple, eliminate answers, and then plug in and analyze word roots and so on. If you don't know a bunch of the words, you just got to skip it and move on. The stuff in the middle, you read the question, read the passage, eliminate, and pick something that just makes you say, well, can't argue with that. It is true. For grammar, straight to the answer choices, looking for patterns, identify what topic is being tested, eliminate answers, and always trust your ear. And then for those bullet point ones, eliminate answers that don't answer what the student wants to do. And if multiple answers remain, then you go back to the bullets for guidance. That's it for verbal. So we're going to talk about math. We've still got, what, almost an hour. So we got plenty of time, and we'll still leave time for questions. But let's just kind of shift gears into math mode. The format. 35 minutes, so a little bit more time, but as opposed to 27 verbal questions, there's only 22 math questions. That gives you an average of like a little over a minute and a half, but again, not all questions are created equal. So some will take 2-3 minutes, some will take 10 seconds. The old PSAT was much more of a reading test, even on math, a lot of word problems. It was kind of annoying. The digital PSAT is much friendlier to like students with English as a second language and just mathier. It's much more of a pure math test where it's like 70% algebra, not that many word problems, not as much stats or geometry. And then when they do test geometry and trig, they provide these formulas. So understanding a few little things, for example, if they say a prism, this is a prism. Not this is a pyramid. This is a cone. This is a sphere. This is a cylinder. These are special right triangles, right? This is Pythagoras. This is area and circumference. So just knowing that they exist is important, because if you get asked about it, sometimes it's just like, oh, right, they have the reference sheet. Let me go click on the top right and open it up. What I mean by that, let me see if I have that here. Yeah, I'll go back to those two slides. But what I mean by that is the reference sheet is that thing in the top right there, the little X squared. Oops. And the other things to really keep in mind, of course, the mark for review, the answer eliminator, but that's less helpful on math. This calculator is the #1 thing by far. So we'll come back to that in a second. Just go back to the structure again. Of the 22 math questions per module, 18 of them are multiple choice. 4 of them are grid-ins, student produced response. So it's about 25%, a little bit less, but the way these work is they always give you the instructions actually on test day, like on the left side of your screen, you'll see acceptable ways to put something in and unacceptable, but you want to just have that memorized already and know the deal, because that's a waste of time on test day. And this is what they give you. You can just kind of look at this real quick to see what's acceptable and what is not an acceptable way to enter an answer. As you look at this, there's been a couple of questions about this, so I'm just gonna kind of lay this out as we go. The PSAT 8-9, that is for 8th and 9th graders. And then the PSAT NMSQT and the PSAT 10 as well. Oh, are you taking 10th and 11th? The only one that counts for national merit is the 11th grade PSAT. So PSAT 8 and 9 are maybe a little bit simpler. They're just preparation for the preparation. PSAT 10, the 10th grade PSAT is the same version, but it doesn't count for national merit. Again, we can talk about that a bit more later. Just back to this slide. So noting that like 0.66 is not good enough. You have to write either 2/3 or 0.6 repeating if that's the way what you ended up with. Same with mixed numbers, 3, 1/2 looks like 31 halves, right? So you need to write 7/2 or 3.5. And then we mentioned like the way it looks on Blue Book test day. So you'll see the time ticking down up top. You'll see the mark for review, and then you have scratch paper that's provided for both verbal and math. And then this calculator, if you click that button, here's what shows up. And just like grammar rules and punctuation stuff is the most important on verbal, this is by far the most important thing on math. Like like just a million times. If you take nothing else from today, and I hope you take a lot out of today, know that the Blue Book Desmos calculator that is built in can do, I don't know, 60, 70% of the math questions for you. So you do have to get experience with how it works, but as soon as you click that little button on the top right, it'll open this. You can expand it to make the bigger version here. That covers some of the question and answers, so you have to do like sliding around, a bit annoying, but it's built into the app and it's literally right there. You can bring your own calculator, and you should, but you can use this for a vast majority of questions. And we'll look at some tricks today, but like it has just changed everything, because there used to be a no calculator section. That doesn't exist anymore. And now you can always use this thing, this graphing calculator. There are certain things, maybe like SOHCAHTOA or like degrees, that you might want to do on your own calculator, degrees versus radians. But I would say just about everything you can do on your own calculator probably can and should be done on Desmos. You can practice on desmos.com. A lot of my students have at least used it at some point or in some way in math or science class, but most do not know the like full utility and how you can use it to full advantage. One thing we can do that we'll do later is plug in equations and identify where they intersect. So you don't have to do isolate and substitute or elimination. You can just graph them. That first easier module is that much easier. You can solve like a bunch of the simple questions, but you can also do a lot of the harder questions with some Desmos tricks. What's nice though is if, let's say, time's an issue at the end, often it's because we're taking too long on the easier questions. So Desmos is often a shortcut or a way to find shortcuts. All right, so let's look at what we see on the math. The old paper PSAT from a few years ago had a lot of stats, right? It was pretty even with algebra, advanced math, and problem solving and data analysis, which is the stats. Now 70% algebra, right? Advanced math is just algebra 2, and then basic algebra is algebra 1. And we'll look at kind of some practice questions and what that appears as. And then geometry and trig and the stats stuff is a total of about 30%. Still important and still where a lot of students honestly struggle, but much less of an emphasis on that, especially the stats, than there used to be. So a ton of algebra, which we like. overall math strategy. Read the question, figure out what you're solving for. And then plan your attack. That's not like sketching out an outline. It's just like, what am I going to do as my first step? And that's where repetition and practice helps. So like in a tutoring session, a lot of what we do is when you see this question, like what is our first step? What are we being given? How can we use it? Should we use the answer choices? Like what's a simple way to solve? Once you know what to do, you compute, calculate. As every math teacher ever, I'm sure, has told you, write everything down, show your work. And then within reason, double check that you answered what the question asked. So we don't have that much time to like check our work. But let's say you're finding a degree measure, right? And it looks like that. And then your answer ends up being like 150 degrees. You should look at that and think, wait a second, that makes no sense. This is clearly less than 90. So a quick logic check, especially if you've got time to do that, is important. And on module 3, let's say you finish with 10 minutes to spare, go back through everything. It's just 22 questions. So do a quick run through, reread, and see if you missed anything. Like just, did I miss a word or a trick here or there? Most math questions involve one or more of the simple algebra steps that I listed here. And these are things that everyone's done: isolating a variable, combining terms, factoring, FOILing, distributing, and substituting. So I don't want to like dull people's mathematical light, right, or abilities because Desmos is the right way to do a lot of stuff. Try this stuff, but if none are working, then you got to think, all right, can the answer choices help? Can I pick numbers, or is Desmos the way to go? But don't lose track of just basic algebra steps and simple stuff like isolating y, right, or just getting x by itself. Something that used to be a bigger, I think, strategy than it is now is working backwards. So using the answers instead of doing the math, just plugging them in. I would say still helpful, but a lot of times we use this in combination with Desmos, because like for this question, which of the following values of x is not a solution of this inequality? We've got a bunch of options. The first is, I think most people should probably solve this by hand. Treat it like an equation where you subtract 2x from both sides, you subtract 3 from both sides, and we get x is greater than or equal to -8. And so this is the only answer that is not greater than or equal to -8. But we could graph this on Desmos. It would just give you an inequality and show you like where x could be. Or we could just, like it shows here, plug in these answers. So like if I plug in 3, see if this is a true thing, we get 3 times 3 is 9 plus 3 is 12. We want to know, is that greater than or equal to 6 minus 5? It is. The only answer that wouldn't work if you plugged it in and would give you an untrue inequality is A. But the lesson on this slide is really just if you get stuck at all, or if you don't have an instinct of what the math step is, you can use the answers, especially when they're friendly integers like this. All right, so just knowing that we've always got that in our back pocket, and most of the questions are multiple choice, so don't sleep on that. Why do the writers give me those answers? We may be able to use them. And then picking numbers. So go ahead and let's leave this question up for a minute. Have you try it and then I'll explain. So with this question, we're going to look at these answers that have exponents, but this is all about exponential modeling. So some students will know If we start with 100,000, that means that the way the exponential modeling has to start is with 100,000. It's always the initial value first. And then now it's an easy question because it says it doubles every 12 hours. So what I want to do is for t days, if it's 1 day, that's 24 hours. And so I want the answer that says in 1 day, we're going to double twice. That is not C because C says in 1 day, well, it's not going to double. It's going to take 12 days to double. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is if I plug in T as 1, so in 1 day, it's going to double twice. Makes sense. It doubles every 12 hours, and there's 2 12-hour blocks in a day. Picking numbers here, I like picking 1 because I think it's just a simple thing. And it's like, okay, in 1 day, how many times should this double? You can translate then to the correct answer. This is something that takes a bit of practice and just refreshers, but the middle number in parentheses is the percent increase or decrease. So that's 2 because it's 1 plus 1, 100% plus another 100%. But like if you had in parentheses 0.72, that would be a decrease of 28%, is what that shows. So like 100 times 0.72, the x means every day or every hour we're going down by 28%. These modeling questions are very, very common. Basic modeling, exponential, and quadratic. Definitely stuff that Desmos and picking numbers can help with, but you got to know the basics behind them. So let's go through the main content areas, talk through some example problems, and just kind of take our time, making sure we feel good about them. So first, here's what basic algebra tests, and I'll leave this up for a minute. This is the stuff that people are usually most comfortable with in terms of they've done it in school, but it's been long enough that we're rusty. So mx plus b, not point slope. Nobody remembers that. Just slope intercept form. Sometimes making y f of x, which is it's always f of x. Systems of equations, linear inequalities, but this doesn't touch the polynomial, like quadratic parabola stuff that you'll see in advanced math. Some examples of like linear algebra would be these two. And we've got a few slides here on how we're going to use Desmos, but we'll start with this one on the left. Question is, how many solutions does the equation have? Mathematically, that means how many values of x make this true. Graphically, this means I've got a line on the left, no exponents, so it's linear, 12x minus 21. Now I've got a line on the right. It's no exponents. If I distribute, I get 12x plus 20. Now, if you remember from algebra 1, if you've got two lines, one is y equals 12x minus 21, and one is y equals 12x plus 20. First, on test day, I would graph them just to like verify for myself. But these are two lines with different intercepts and the same slope, which means they never intersect because they're parallel, which means there are 0 solutions, no values of x that make these two solutions or makes these two equations the same. For the second one, we've got just a modeling question and they're asking me, what does y mean? So the thing to do with that is like try to plug in y is 0, y is 1, and kind of think about what changed. Y definitely has to do with the residence area, not the industrial, right? Because it's 1800, 1800. So A and C make no sense. Then we got to be a little bit careful because they're saying what we're modeling is the total number of devices in the town. So that means 1800Y is the total number of devices in the residence area, which means that just the Y part must be the average. Just by elimination, it has to be that. Because again, 1800Y is the total. So that means that when you divide by 1800, you get Y, that's the average. This question is way trickier than the first one, but by elimination, without understanding everything, you can still get it really confidently because you know it's got to be residential and it's not the 1800Y, so it's B. And again, we can come back to some of these at the end, but I want to do a few more and kind of talk through each content area because we've already got some good questions as well. So next up, advanced math. This is also algebra, mainly algebra 2, which is why for the PSAT and SAT, it's good to have at least a semester of algebra 2 under your belt, which some 10th graders, for example, don't yet, but most 11th graders will. We are being tested on exponents and roots, expressions that are equivalent, meaning the same, so graphing is a good move there. Quadratics, so upward and downward facing parabolas and shifting graphs. Exponential modeling and functions, absolute value, which is easy on Desmos, and then rational and radicals. So stuff like that you've seen probably again, like I said, in algebra class and maybe even pre-calc, but just like equivalent. How do you make this look different? Algebra is all about isolating and just making things look a little different. Both this and the basic algebra, 70% of the test and probably 50% at least of those questions, maybe more, can be done on Desmos. Here are a couple examples. I'd say these are advanced math, but not like the craziest tough ones at all. But I'll leave these up for a moment for people to try. The left-hand side, first question has a ton of variables, but all the answers have us isolate 3k minus 2. So the way to do this math would be by hand. Multiply both sides by the denominator to get rid of the fraction. And then you're just going to divide that 3n away on both sides. And we end up with d. Right? Because we're multiplying 3n here and here. So if you divide it, it'll cancel. And then you end up with this over 3n. That question, not too bad as long as you are careful with your multiplying, dividing, and don't combine steps. Same with the one on the right, actually. The question is just which value represents the height from which the ball was dropped. Well, when the ball was dropped, 0 seconds have passed. So what they're really asking just is, what is y when x is 0? The easiest way to do this question would be put this into Desmos as your first expression. And then for expression number 2, right below it, just type in h of 0. Because that will tell you what y is when x is 0. The answer here is 600. This is the y-intercept, not the maximum point, not the vertex, but this is the y-intercept, and therefore our answer. And since here they didn't throw the ball, they dropped it, I guess it's also the maximum. This, though, scares people because it reminds them of like physics, right, or calculus, or something that's often harder than what this is actually testing. This is just letting you know, hey, we've got a downward opening parabola, and they're asking you from where we started, right? So really, if you think about x's and y's, these questions can be pretty simple, even though they're the advanced math. Third category out of 4 is problem solving and data analysis, aka statistics, but also including percents and proportions and ratios, which gives people a lot of trouble. I should actually change this. I don't think it's 20%. It's probably more like 15. Just change that real quick. 15%. Better. And then I think, like I said, percents are the toughest, but I will say that we can probably use Desmos for most of those. Mean, median, mode, making sure you know what those are. Again, Desmos is a tool that can be used to find mean of a bunch of numbers. Probability, not too complex in the way they test it, but you need to make sure you look at the wording and have the correct denominator. And then vaguely, like not vaguely, but very rarely they'll test stuff like margin of error or samples and inferences, and just wanting you to know about like how data analysis and statistics works generally. Usually those are very logical questions. Even if you don't know, you can still get there. Here's a couple examples of those. So I don't think these questions, either of them are very hard, to be honest, but I do want to show you how I would use Desmos for both to make it incredibly easy. So for the first one, when you type in numbers with commas, you want to take the commas away. Commas are a no-no for Desmos. That just doesn't like them. So if I wanted to test this first question, which is 1.248 million, is what percent of 1.6 million? That's all that's asking. So here's what I'm going to type in right up here. 124800, and then I wrote equals X percent. It gave me the word of. So I just wrote X percent of this, and then this little squiggly means that it's graphed a line for us. So all I have to do is zoom out, maybe way out, not sure, not too far, and then zoom in. It looks like this is our answer. 78% is the correct answer there. 1.248 million is 78% of that. If I wanted to double check again, I would say 78% of 1600000. I think that's enough zeros. And I get the answer that way as well. So percents, very easily done on Desmos, very crucial and helpful. But then also that second question about mean, you can always find mean by just putting this in. So like literally the word mean, and then these numbers in parentheses with commas in between them. On test day, you can't copy paste, but here just for purposes of this question, looks like the second set is that same set of numbers just without the 1. Well, unsurprisingly, this data set has a bigger number. So the mean of the second set is bigger than the mean of the first. If you ever wanted to make this into a fraction, you just press this button. Not necessary here, but just a kind of a cool thing, right? So that's 50/7. This is 49/6, but clearly the second set of numbers is bigger than the first. So just a bit of a tip of the iceberg as to what Desmos can do, and then we'll look at that a bit more as we finish up today. But that means that the answers for these two questions are C as in cat and A, respectively. Finally, last and least, geometry and trig. So only about 5 questions total, but they do 3D geometry, they do SOHCAHTOA, they do stuff that people just have learned and forgotten, or it's been like years since we did it in 9th grade. If they don't draw a shape for you, that's probably the most important time to use scratch paper. So just a right triangle or whatever, you got to draw your shapes. If you forget formulas, remember they're provided. But you'll see lines, angles, a lot of right triangles, perimeter area volume, SOHCAHTOA, but then also some 3D geometry stuff. A couple examples. Definitely trickier than some of the ones we've done, I would say, for most people. So I'll leave them up for a bit. Sorry about that. First question is a Pythagoras question. Could also be a Desmos question, but the way to do this, if you're doing it by hand, which is fine, would be remembering Pythagoras or checking the reference sheet and doing a squared plus b squared. So 48 squared plus 52 squared is 7,312, meaning that this is the same as saying the square root of 7,312. This is another place where I go to Desmos. So again, even though it's kind of unwieldy, I'll just show you that real quick. So if I write right here, 4 square root of x equals square root of 7,312. It's again, give me this little squiggly line. So I think we should have an answer graphed. Again, might have to zoom way out. There it is. Right, this is my x or my b value looks like 457. I wonder if yeah, it feels like a big number, but like that is one way to do it. The other way, just to kind of come back here, once we get to this step, is to take 7312 and divide it by 4, but that is the same as dividing it by square root of 16. And so then that's another way you could find b pretty easily. I think this question is one of the harder ones we've seen today, simply because it has a variable, it's got like the square root rules, and it's testing geometry. The other one here is alternate interior, alternate exterior. So what we want to know is that y and z are the same, which means y plus x has to equal 180. So that's where we would start, is we'd say 10c plus 5 plus 5c plus 55 equals 180. That means 15c equals 120, combining terms there. And then c is 120 over 15, which is whatever that is, like 8. But then we need to find our z value, which again we said is the same as y. So we can plug that back in here. So it's 10 times 8 plus 5. Actually, wait, that doesn't look right, does it? Oh, because, what did I mess up? 20. Yeah, 85 though doesn't seem right. I think maybe that they have this question messed up because I think it should be that these two should be flipped. Right, I know it says the figure is not drawn to scale. So the correct answer here is B, but technically they messed something up with the drawing. So I'll probably change this for my next presentation. The key though is to understand that X and Y are supplementary, just like X and Z are supplementary. These add up to 180, whereas Y and Z are equal. So they will test that alternate interior, alternate exterior rule at least once probably on testing. And then just last, little stretch here, and then we'll do questions. So we mentioned Desmos can solve a ton of stuff, and you can practice at desmos.com/graphing. But like, just want to show you how ridiculous this is. It makes me feel like a fraud as a tutor sometimes, because instead of teaching the math, it's better just to say, hey, here's how you do it on Desmos. This is the right way to do this. And it's quicker and it's more reliable. So here's one example. The solution to a system is this point xy. What is the value of y? 3 years ago, or if I was tutoring ACT, I would have said, let's isolate x and then just substitute, or let's use elimination and try to eliminate one of these two variables. But now I will say, put these into Desmos and find where they intersect. It's like stupidly easy. You just have to know to do it. Literally plug in the first equation and the second equation. You do not need to isolate y or change the form. You just plug them in. It'll graph you 2 lines. A solution is the point of intersection, and they wanted the y value, so it's 3. That's it. Easy as could be. A question that would take 10 seconds and would be definite answer as long as you typed it in without making any sort of little careless errors. So anytime you're looking for a solution to a system of equations, that is where they intersect. 3. Quadratics. So that was basic algebra. This is advanced math. Here we've got a polynomial or a parabola at 2x squared plus x minus 21. It has zeros, which are x-intercepts at these 2 points. We want to know the length of the line segment, so the distance between those 2 x-intercepts. Plenty of things we could do, but we should just graph it and click on the x-intercepts. Right, so you put it in, you don't need to do y equals, you never do equals 0. You just type in 2x squared plus x minus 21. It graphs a parabola. You click on the things. That looks like a 6.5 unit distance. Right, so easy as could be. They just wanted to know the length of the distance basically between the 2 x-intercepts. So we just graphed it and clicked on them. The answer is C. And then just a couple more. This one looks intimidating. H of x equals 2x cubed minus 3x plus 4, which table gives 3 values of x and their corresponding values of y for the given function. So in other words, which of these answers has points that are all on the line or the graph? This is the one of these where it's just ridiculous how easy it is now. You can literally type a table in. One thing is if you enter the points rather than the equation, so like if you just typed a table in and did this little regression thing will appear. And actually, let me just show you how that works real quick. So if I type in, I'm not going to use that question, but if I type in the word table and then I add like some points, so let's say -2, -8, -1, -6, 0, -8. Notice this little thing that popped up, right? I can add a regression. If it's a line, I now have the equation, but this we saw was a quadratic. Boom. So they will give you the actual equation. If you hit the home button, they will also give you the graph. So given 3 points, you can find anything you need for a polynomial. If it's a line, you only need 2 points to do that, and you can do linear. So the only three I've seen used are linear, quadratic, and exponential. And it is just a cheat code. Like it makes kind of tough questions really easy and easy questions even simpler. So the way this one would work is if you typed in the equation and then hit table, you can then see which points work. So it looks like -1, 5 is a point on this graph, which is why it wouldn't be C or D, right? -1, 5 is only in choice A or B. So we just got to check, is it 210 or 214? It's 214. So then we have our answer. Right? The table stuff is that's not something most of my students have ever done before, so it's a good thing to practice. And then I believe this is the last one of these. It's a system of inequalities. Give you a minute to read that. We've got $100,000 for laptops and tablets. Got to purchase at least 150 tablets, which cost $230. Laptops are $640. And then the question is, what's the maximum number of laptops the school can purchase, keeping laptops and tablets as integers? This actually is not the easiest question, but if you write the equations or the inequalities correctly, it's easy. X has to be greater than or equal to 150. That's the laptops. 230x plus 640y has to be less than or equal to 100,000. That's the budget. And then you can just click on the intersection point. We know the 150 has to do with the tablets. So that 102.344, what that means is if you go above that, you're no longer in the correct double shaded range. So 102 is the maximum number of full laptops. 102 is our answer because you cannot go above that and have a whole number for y without exiting the inequality range. But anything below 102 looks like it's in the range. That takes some getting used to. Inequalities are just by nature kind of confusing. To recap, though, what we talked about for math, answer what the question's asking. Always circle what you're solving for or highlight it. Don't leave anything blank because there are no points off for wrong answers, which means skip around. Grab the easiest points. If you're looking at a question like, gosh, I do not know what this is, box and whisker plot, haven't seen it, don't know what to do. Don't spend time agonizing over it. Just go get a different question that you maybe are familiar with. You can bring your own calculator and use it. Don't forget to use Desmos, though, and the formulas. Almost every question, even at the end of upper level module 4, there's usually some sort of simple solution. And then how to practice. This is a question I've already seen a couple times. Appleruth, so my company has 4 fully digital SAT tests, 2 of which are like given as PSATs as well. But again, SAT prep and PSAT prep are the same. They really are. The nice thing about these practice tests is the score reports offer a ton of detail. So obviously what questions you missed, but also what question types and where. That can help you create an individual plan or a plan with the tutor. There's also 7 Blue Book SATs on the College Board app on which you will take the real test. So those are the most true to life. And there's 2 digital PSAT 10s and I think 1 PSAT 8-9. The big difference between those PSATs and SATs is the PSATs are slightly easier, right? Not as tough of vocab, not as advanced of math, not as long and involved of verbal questions. Other than this, Khan Academy is a good resource, but I would say I would do this stuff first. There's what's called a question bank, SAT Suite question bank. You can find PSAT and SAT questions on. Appleruth has a great book. Even without tutoring, you can get the book. It breaks down every question type. It's really, really good. Our instructional design team is awesome. And then you can always, meet with a tutor, right? So like that's what I do most days, like Tuesday through Saturdays. I'm just working online via Zoom. And we have a ton of awesome tutors. You can request to work with me, and if I have availability, we can make that work as well. So we've got a bunch of questions already coming in. I'm going to launch one last little poll here. If you are interested in test prep help or EF coaching or need support in a subject in school, feel free to call this number. It's on the next slide as well with an email. And let's open up for questions. If you don't have any, hope you got a lot out of it. Feel free to call it a day. Go enjoy some college football or whatever floats your boat. But let's open up for questions. We've got a solid 10 minutes, so that'll be good. Okay, the first question is, are the two pre-test modules at the beginning of each section? I assume this refers to the two experimental questions that don't count on every section. The answer is no, we don't know where they are. They will not be the first two, probably. They'll be sprinkled in. So don't worry about the experimental questions. We just can't really differentiate. It's good to know that they exist, but we can't really adjust our strategy based on that. But no, those questions will be somewhere randomly mixed into the test. Okay, next question is, if only 5 people take the test in a state, which would be interesting, how many will be eligible for national merit? That's an interesting question. I don't think that that is a thing that happens. Even in the states that are less populated, there are going to be, at least hundreds, if not thousands of juniors taking it. But like, I guess if 5 people took it, then that wouldn't necessarily be enough to have like a top 1%. So not a question I can definitely answer, although it's an interesting logic question. Let's say 5 million people took the test in a state. I think of those 5 million people, probably like, let's say 5,000, 50,000. It's like, it's a very small percentage of people who can get national merit. Next, what is the difference on the PSAT 8-9 versus the PSAT NMSQT? And which one am I taking in 9th grade in Georgia? So in 9th grade in any state, you're taking the PSAT 8-9. Difference is it's a little bit easier. It doesn't address algebra stuff you haven't done yet. And it is a preparation for the preparation, basically, because the PSAT even in junior year is not important for most, but it's like an early version of it. So just PSAT 8-9, slightly easier, and it's for 8th, 9th graders rather than 10th, 11th. Next question, is the Desmos calculator a graphing calculator? Can we do all the things we do normally on Desmos on the SAT, PSAT, Desmos calculator as well? Yes, it is built in the exact same way as the Desmos.com one. It is a graphing calculator, but you also have an option to go scientific, and you can do all the things you would do on your calculator and more. Let's see, are there certain vocabulary words that I should study for the reading section? I mean, yes, there are definitely some websites and some things you can look at. Reading is a good thing. If you're going to take like any sort of vocabulary flashcard or database set, I would do, I don't know, the best way to do it would be like just try to learn 10 words a day, 50 words a week, right? Or 75 words a week, and then revisit them at the end of the week, right? You never know when you're going to see something that appears on test day, either as an answer choice or even just in the midst of a passage. Yes, we will send the slideshow. I believe the recording gets sent on Fridays usually. So even though today's a Saturday session, maybe they'll send it earlier. But my understanding is the recording does get sent out to registrants, people who registered for this. So yes. Couple questions. So we have to take it 2 times. Not necessarily. Most people end up taking it 3 times, 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade, with the PSAT in 11th grade being the only one that would potentially count. But it's all via the school, right? You definitely in 1 year should not have to take the PSAT twice. All right, got some more good questions. I probably won't get to every single one, but we'll keep going for a while here. Next is, I got a 1500 on my PSAT in 10th grade. Can I use that score on the NMSQT, or do I have to take it separately? Great score. Sadly, no, you have to take it again. But if you got a 1500 on the 10th grade PSAT, you're in good shape and you have a good shot at national merit. But no, the PSAT 10, no matter how well you do in 10th grade, it cannot count for national merit. Only the 11th grade version. All right, next. Of the math and reading and writing part, which one is the hardest? very much depends on the person. How do I prepare for the reading and writing part? So what I mentioned today with the grammar rules, but to prepare for this whole test, I would be taking practice SATs and then evaluating questions you've missed. The most valuable thing they can do in a tutoring session is go through mock test results and say, okay, yeah, if you missed, these 7 questions, let's look at why and fix it. All right, a couple more. Yes, they have the Desmos calculator in the SAT as well as PSAT. Another good one is, how do I know if I'm better suited for ACT or SAT? So like I said, the PSAT is just like the SAT. So if you find that suits you, then SAT is great. The only real way to figure it out is take a practice ACT as well, compare that to your practice PSAT or SAT, and decide where your scores are stronger, which one you liked better, prepare to your strength, right? So it's really just a practice test for each is the first move there. And then a couple questions about like missing questions and are they worth the same? So I mentioned this briefly, but not all questions are worth the same. However, like a grammar question on module 2 is worth the same as one of the long graph questions. What's worth more than anything is module 1 and module 3. So the lower, like the initial baseline levels. If you miss a couple questions on module 1, that might cost you 50 points. Whereas you miss the 2 questions on module 2, that might be 10 or 20 points. So technically there's within each module, no question's worth more than another, but module 1 stuff is worth more than module 2 upper level. We got time for just 1 or 2 more, and then we'll wrap up. Let's see. A lot of good questions. So a lot of the questions are just about the presentation. And like I said, my understanding is that they send out the whole recording. So like you'll see me and hear my annoying voice and see the slides just like you did today. So that's what my understanding is, that they send out, not the actual presentation itself, because there's some copyrighted material probably. All right, let's see what else. Yeah, I think I'll finish with, because a lot of the questions are just about like, how do I study? So vocab is usually the last like item of business, because if you're at a super high level, then you can kind of focus in on, okay, there's these obscure vocab words that I'm sometimes seeing and not getting. But the reality is the best way to study and prepare is start with a Blue Book SAT, like Blue Book Test 4. There's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So take test 4, either timed or untimed. Think about, where am I missing questions? What was hard? The nice thing about Blue Book is they give you the results with answer explanations. So even if you're not meeting with a tutor, you can see kind of their explanation, which are sometimes good. And then learn from your mistakes. So like, I'll finish with 2 things. Number 1 is, the best way to get better at this test is to put in effort. It's not a test of intelligence, it's a test of effort. So for PSAT, the more work you do, the more you correct your mistakes, the better you will be, flat out. And then the other thing I'll say is, just along those lines, this is not a test of intelligence, and especially PSAT, like it just measures how well you did on this test on this day. It's not like how worthwhile you are, how smart you are. So no matter what, don't stress too much about this. Even if you're like at a high level, you're like, I got to get national merit. It's a nice thing, but your SAT score, you have a chance to take that several times. Your ACT score, that's going to really be what makes the difference, if anything. And just again, these are just standardized tests. So like, yes, the way it is, they're important in the grand scheme of things. But as far as like, who you are, don't let these test scores define you. And don't sweat it if you take a test and the score doesn't come out how you want, right? This can be adjusted, and it's not the end of the world. You had some great questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but feel free to reach out to this email below if you have more. And thank you guys so much for joining. Hope you guys got a lot out of it. Have a great rest of your weekend.